A few months ago, I felt especially ambitious and set out to take an 8-mile hike to see a waterfall. I was anxious to make a trip like this before the leaves were done changing colors, and I hoped to get some great autumn vibrancy captured for this year. The decision was firmed up when the temperature dropped to a pleasant range, and the weather cooperated to make this trip enjoyable. 40 miles of comfortable travel on paved roads was followed by 15 more miles of a dirt road, traveled much more slowly, with muddy ruts and jarring potholes that guided me to the flat spot I needed to park my truck. And then I started the hiking part of my adventure. My first choice confronted me. A number of routes were available, and the wilderness trail that I chose was one of the easier ones. But it did connect with multiple others that could lead me astray if I didn't stay alert. Ahead of me, the trail started out flat, covered with a blanket of colored leaves that recently took flight from their perched high up in the trees and glided gently to the forest floor. A recent rain dampened the path, and the familiar crunch of leaves underfoot was missing from my expected nature soundtrack. There was a lot of quiet, in fact. Too far from the river to hear even a murmur, I was wrapped in the silence that descends from large trees when there's no wind to stir them on a crisp fall morning like this. I walked on. The passage of time was lost to me, and the weight of worldly stress lifted as the sound of the river grew louder, beating a hasty path over the rocks and trees that attempted to impede its enthusiasm. It led me along until I reached the falls that I was looking for, and I watched the water yell as it jumped into the waiting pool below with a crash. Camera in hand, I wandered beside as an observer to the wet playground and took portraits of the trees and falling water, cascading poses that dancing sunlight used to build rainbows across my lens. It was a busy setting of active peace that surrounded me with multiple sensations. But too soon it was time to leave, and so I made certain to find the correct trail and start back, occasionally checking my map just to be sure. I walked and listened, the soft leaves slowly beginning to dry, and they added character to my step. Walking around a corner, I was suddenly startled by another adventurer, briskly heading by. He looked up, just as befuddled to run into someone on this otherwise lonesome trail. We mumbled some pleasantries, and then he asked me in an offhand way, "How much further do I have to go?" To which I replied, "Well, that depends on where you're going." He laughed as he realized how vague he'd been and how correct I was. More specifics were conveyed and information passed, and we parted company, each going in our own direction. As I continued on, I contemplated the question that my fellow traveler had asked and how it really was applicable to more than just this tree-covered byway. How often do I start off on a new project before I very clearly identify the end goal? Do I take the time to make certain I'm headed in the right direction before I pick up my pace? Am I willing to stop and ask for directions when I need them? And when I do, am I careful to make sure that the questions I ask are clear enough to get a proper response? Do I know what I want to accomplish next in this life so that I can correctly figure out how much further I have to go on this leg of my travels? I made it safely back to my truck before the sun went down and slowly started the rough ride back to reality. I left this journey with both colorful pictures and some added wisdom to take with me into my next tomorrow. So, how far is it to the next place? It seems like a simple question with a straightforward answer, but the truth is, regardless of the context, we have to know where it is that we're going.